and welcome to Sippin N Bitchin, where the drinks are icy and the book talk is spicy. We're your main bitches. I'm Sam.
I almost said I'm Sam.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny because earlier I legit thought I was like, I'm just gonna say I'm Steph to see what you do.
My brain. So when we do this intro, I just act like I don't know what's happening. But in my head, I recite it because, like, I'm never going to actually probably say it because I don't think I could do it with a straight face. But in my head, I say it. So then she gets to the I'm Sam, but in my head, I repeated I'm Sam for me to say, and that's I'm Steph. That's it.
that's eventually what she's gonna get to.
That's eventually, yeah. Listen, we're the same
That's
person,
so funny.
sort of, but you know, it's fine. Welcome to episode 4, part 1. We are gonna do 2 parts of this episode. The first part is a lot of like just introductory stuff because we have finally made it to the Flesh and Fire series, which is the prequel, where it introduces new characters that you can fall in love with, which we hope you did. We fell in love with them again because we already had loved them. So this book also has a prologue, and it was 45 chapters, but we broke it down where we should be able to cover all of it in 2 episodes. So yay us, whoop whoop. If you're part of our Patreon and you're listening to this, both episodes or both parts should be out for this episode. So enjoy.
And if you're not part
interested.
of our Patreon and you're hearing part 1, you can go see part 2 if you go join the Patreon now.
Yes, or you can just wait until, you know, it comes out.
Patient, so.
Yeah, literally same. That's, you know, the name of the game. Okay. Setting the scene. Prologue.
I think this is our first book that's had a prologue.
Yeah. Out of the series, yes.
Yeah. Well, both series, but yeah.
Well, this universe. I don't know why I said universe.
Yes. This universe has one prologue.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thought that this prologue was really well done. I think but it kind of sets the scene a decent amount. Most of the show notes that I have are just little things that I found were parallels to Poppy and her life. So the prologue literally starts out with, "You will not disappoint us today, Sarah." And I very much was just like, oh, great, another responsibility right off the bat. Like, cool, thanks. And we're introduced to Sir Holland, who teaches Sarah, and it was a Victor parallel that I wanted to note. Don't ignore my comment. Did you just giggle at my just
I was trying to figure out why my thing's not showing highlights until chapter 9, and then I looked over and the eye line was with that show note.
Yeah, well, something I found interesting here is she has like a coping mechanism for her emotions, or her like a meditation kind of vibe, which Poppy doesn't have. I know.
Have.
Yeah, that's what I was like. She should have it, but she doesn't. The breathe in, slow and steady, hold until you feel your heart slow, breathe out, hold kind of thing. Just a little meditation, but I think it's very helpful and different from Poppy's perspective. It talks about her being groomed, and how she's literally set up to be a seductress of seduction. Yes, I said seductress of seduction. Which is different from Poppy.
She was told how to seduce, so.
No, that's what I'm saying. So this is like a different vibe. Sarah is very much being groomed to be a seductress, to
kill,
become his weakness and then kill him, where Poppy was like opposite. She was just like Virgin Mary, didn't even touch a boy, know anything. Like Miss Willow was like her only escape in terms of that kind of vibe
stuff.
There was my notes correct me up sometimes. There are White Veil parallels. They do mention the Kiyu wolves. Love them. And she talks about seeing one by the lake while she was collecting rocks
A
a
white
while
one.
ago. A white one. I just made a face. Sorry. That was it. Um um and she's wearing the veil of the chosen, quote unquote. And I have this quote in here. You may not be chosen, but you were born into this realm, shrouded in the veil of the primals, a maiden as the fates promised, and you shall leave this realm touched by life and death. Ominous. Real
There's
ominous.
lots of ominous stuff in this book. This book is both books are heavy, but I feel like this one has an even heavier tone to it. Cause like Poppy, like you said, she was sheltered away from everything, didn't know anything about life, had like neck down, nothing to be seen, white veil, that stuff. Whereas she's wearing like this sheer chiffon gown with the veil, but she's been hidden away, but taught to fight, taught to do all this stuff. One experiences more of the physical neglect and abuse. Sarah has a lot of the emotional
Yes.
neglect and abuse. It's just, oh, a mental health
And,
in this book, man.
and then the prologue is Sarah's 17th birthday, where she
Mm-hmm.
would become, in quotes, I'm putting in case y'all aren't watching this on YouTube, the primal of death consort. Um, and they're just talking about her feelings. You can read the show notes if you are interested, but I'm just kind of giving a lay of the land. Tavius is the new Alistair. That's all I'm gonna say about that. I want to vomit. Yeah, I got big ick when Tavius was talking about his wedding day to
That princess.
probably the princess or the lady, whatever, and he was like, I promised her I'd be gentle. That's all I gotta say about that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but something I like about
Princess
Sarah,
Kaylee.
which is thank you. I thought it was someone with a K, but I couldn't remember
I
what it
did
was.
too. That's why I was like,
Um, something I love about Sarah and like that's different from Poppy is she's more assertive and more confident. So,
yes.
she even says, "Touch me and I will break every bone in your hand, and then I will make sure the princess has no reason to fear her wedding night or any night she is doomed to spend at your side." She's very much not afraid to say anything. I think
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't feel invincible, but very much
He
doesn't,
can't kill her. He knows he can't do
yeah.
anything to her.
Like there's no consequences to her actions really.
Yeah.
Um, and there's just a lot of background of where she is. We're introduced to the mortal Satoria, where legend claims that she'd been picking flowers along like a steep bluff, as they call it. I would have just said like mountain.
That was a cliff.
Um,
Cliffs of Sorrow.
yeah. So it's a
I
cliff.
mean, that's what they got named after
Yeah.
she died, was the Cliff of Sorrow.
Um, And so we get a little bit of a backstory. Nothing really is told about her. And then we're introduced to shadow priests, which have their lips stitched closed. Remind you of anyone? And we're also told that, or we're also described of Sarah's crescent moon birthmark and the rot of the land.
Yep.
And the deal that was made from to the primal of death that he would marry, or her dad made with the primal of death that he would marry off his firstborn daughter as his consort.
Yes.
That words are hard today. I don't know what it is.
And it was understood that oh man, I cleared my throat and it cleared my brain.
Yeah. Essentially it gives background on the deal and cut to the end of the prologue where the primal of death shows up and he's like, I have no need of a consort, a consort. Peace out. And then
And he
chapter one
said that's the
starts.
only she could hear too. Like he showed up,
Yeah.
people saw him, he went up to her, he's like, I have no need of a consort. I don't need a concert. Taylor Swift killed me already. Anyway, sorry. um, I'm in a bitter mood, guys. Um,
Correct.
but disappeared and her
Ch-
her mother.
Chapter 1 starts 3 years later,
Yeah.
after she has been riddled with or riddles her family with disappointment because he didn't take her.
That's a big time jump. Let me just say that.
That is a huge time jump, but I also something we learn as we're reading is that each year she has been brought back hoping this man shows up to marry her, and he does not. So cut to chapter 1, where we're introduced to Lord Klaus, the head of Lord Suros, advisor to the Queen and King of Lasagna. Yeah.
Yeah, because they
And
said it sounds like lasagna in the other series.
yeah, the Lord Klaus is essentially they're doing some sort of deal or trying to pledge allegiance to the flag. And he's like, fuck you, and rolls a nice old head of Lord Saros to the foot of the royal guard. And Sir Holland is like, didn't expect that. Sir Holland is quite a character, and I think that's hilarious because he's more outspoken than Victor ever was, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love him.
And Lord Klaus is like making eyes at Sarah, and Sarah's mom is just like, my handmaiden is not up for grabs, essentially. And something I wrote down was like, bro, why is she a secret? Like, I understand why she's a secret because of like who she is, but the fact that your own mother is disrespecting you is
Yeah,
crack of shit.
that's really hard because like I get that they didn't want people to know about her to quote unquote protect her in case people found out who she was, but they didn't have to know about the prophecy. Like if this was something not many people knew about, they could have just said, "Oh, this is our daughter," and then when she was gone, they could have made up some story. And she would have been protected technically by the primal of death. Like no one would have gone after her at that point. But yeah.
No one has a brain in this
No.
universe, evidently. Um, and we're also the royal crest of this time is described as a crown of gold leaves with a sword through the center, which I think is a beautiful
I like that, yeah.
crest. I will say the Atlantean crest is giving badass bitch. This one is giving royalty, like elegance, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a sense of badassery, but it's more like an elegant kind of vibe instead of straight up bad to the bone. We also are and not introduced, but she's also has a Shadowstone dagger, which um is described in the book. I also will say that Jennifer has this on her shop in the form of a sticker. She had replicas, but I can't seem to find them anymore, but I will post them as like after this episode drops, obviously, because you're listening to this, but you should be able to go to our Instagram and I will post photos so that you can visually see those. I will say I do think I like Sarah's dagger more, only because it not that Sarah's doesn't embody like badassery, but I just think the
Poppies.
significance of Poppy's, I don't know. I think I vibe with Poppy's more than Sarah's, but I do think Sarah's looks badass too.
I think they both have a very big like I get that. They both have very big significance. Like one is especially made to kill like Craven and things like that and the Ascended, and another one is specifically meant to harm gods and primals and things like that. So they're very both much badass and needed for their own stories. But yeah, no, I get that. I like the look of
Yeah.
Poppy's.
I also kind of just I think I resonate more with the fact that Victor gave Poppy. I think like that whole exchange just like made the relationship deeper. Not that Sarah's and Holland's relationship isn't deep, but
Right.
it's
You don't
not
get it
quite
as
the
much
same.
as you get Victor in.
Yeah.
Yeah, Poppy.
Um okay, so then Sarah's mom uses Sarah as the like a message sender to Lord Klaus because
She's
he
her own
rejected
personal
them.
assassin.
Yeah, her own personal assassin. And essentially she big murders Klaus.
So I'm
Good
gonna do with my
riddance.
daughter. I'm gonna hide her away and then make her my assassin when she fails me.
Um, and then we are given some background that there are 10 primals that hold court in Elysium. And we also she has some sort of power because warmth gathered under her skin. But we aren't introduced to what her powers are yet. And she is investigating these gods that are going into her town and murder a kid. And the end of the chapter goes, a hand clamped down on my mouth and a strange jolt went through me at the exact moment an arm folded around me, pinning my arms to my sides. The shock of the contact, the jolt of someone touching me, touching my skin with theirs, cost me the split second I had to break the hold. I was jerked back against the hard wall of a chest. Don't tempt me with a good time, y'all. That's all I gotta say about
Yes.
that.
I would have gone after those gods too. Like she found these gods and goddesses that were killing people, including babies. And
Yeah,
that's just rude.
it is absolutely disrespectful. And I think it's well, we'll get to there. We'll get there. Um so then a male speaks. I'm not sure what you plan to do back there. But I can assure you it would have ended disastrously for you. Um and I thought this part was funny, but she has never really been held before, and she's comparing it to entering her lake. The sensations of his hands over my mouth, his fingers resting against my cheek, and being held so tightly, being held at all, was nearly as overwhelming as the realization that I was trapped. And I just think that that's so. You can tell that she hasn't had a significant relationship because she's like comparing it to a place that fills her with like the warmth and love and like homes kind of vibe. Um anyway.
And also the comparison, like it's like a battling thing because you have the comparison of feeling at home, but you also have the comparison of feeling trapped. And
Mm-hmm.
that signifies that, like, if you've never been hugged or like held or anything like that, it could
Or if
feel
you
like
just
you're
don't
being
like it.
trapped. Yeah. It could be a very overwhelming, like, especially if you have like sensory disorders, things like that. It could just be very like overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're like, I don't know what to do with this. And then they try to fight.
Yeah, they try to fight and then she realizes that he's a god because of his
Big
silver
whoops.
eyes. Eyes that were an incredible luminous shade of silver, bright as the moon itself. Beautiful. That was all I could think at first, and then I saw the light behind his pupils, the wispy tendrils of ether. Um, and then so he's essentially protecting her from the gods that just murdered this baby. And um so they're talking and going back and forth, and then he senses that the gods are coming, so he's like, "Kiss me. Kiss me, Sarah. I don't know you, but kiss me anyway." And
It's
well,
basically like, you don't want them to see you. I don't want them to see me. They ain't gonna care if we'd be doing this, and you know.
so then they be doing this, and we ain't mad about it.
Nope.
And so then they were finished, and he was making a comment about pretending, and she was just like, like, what the heck? And he was like, my apologies. I should have elaborated. I'm very good at pretending to enjoy things I do not, but I was not pretending when I had your tongue in my mouth. And I was like, I mean, mood.
Big
I know
mood.
who it is, but that's okay.
He
And
can
then we go to,
amuse me.
that's literally what I put. The chapter notes. So chapter 3, we go into it. This the first few chapters, it's this back and forth of him trying to protect her, but she doesn't really know who he is. And
And let's be honest though, he's doing it in a little bit of a condescending way.
well,
So
yeah,
she's
she's
like, I
beneath
don't.
him.
Yeah, yeah. He. Well, it's more of the like, in chapter 2, he called her a feisty little thing, and she did not like being called little. She did not like any of that. Um, and so it's very, to her, she's feeling very condescended, but to him, he's like, I'm doing you a favor. I'm saving your life. So it's a very fun
But she didn't
dynamic.
ask for it. Yeah, but
Yeah.
she didn't ask for his help, which is like a really big theme here.
Yeah.
Um, and then she has this whole existential crisis about how, like, if she were to marry the primal of death, like having a baby wouldn't even be like an option for her. Which I thought was interesting. Because it's like you have been like groomed and trained to do all these things, and like now it's like the realization, the switch is flipping in her brain.
Mhm.
I thought that was very
Yeah,
interesting.
because they're investigating the house and she sees like the little baby stuff and she's like, I never even thought about having this before.
Yeah, and then she was like, if I did have one, like I would protect it and burn through both realms just so I could flay the skin from the body of the one who hurt them. A little extreme, honey, but like I understand.
As a mother, I get it, man. I get it.
If you
I
start
want to
lighting
kill
things
my
on
kids.
fire,
I I want to kill my kids some days, but that's me. I'm allowed to do that. Someone else does it, they dead. Don't look at me like
uh,
that.
don't think any sort of, I don't think we're harming any children for
We're
legal
not harming
purposes. I think,
children.
yeah, I was like, you might want
No,
to
I'm
take
saying if
that
someone
back.
harmed my children, I would
Well,
be in
yeah.
jail.
No, the person who did it would be brought to justice, period.
Yeah,
Anyway,
by my hands.
anyway, um, yeah, that's a gift. I'm just going to say this last part of this little note that I put. Um, they're going back and forth, and essentially, this man has a kink for violence, just like our
Mm.
best friend Cass does, and I thought that that was really great to note. And then he calls her Liesa and says she's very brave.
Dun
And
dun dun.
if y'all didn't read the other books, you don't know what that means, but we know what that means.
But
Um,
if you did, then you're sitting there going, wait a minute.
true. So essentially he leaves her and he's like, be careful, I'll be watching. And like they part ways after they investigate this house that, you know, trying to figure out what prompted these gods to do this in the first place.
I don't know how comforting I would feel to know I just met this god who I don't know, who I disrespected. And so he could have killed me anytime he wanted to for
But
the
instead we made
disrespect.
it out. But instead we made out, and he
Right.
just, enjoys that I'm disrespectful just a little bit.
And
And
then he says, be careful, I'll be watching.
I mean,
Like part of me would be like, how literal is this? I'll be watching. Like, kind of hot, kind of not.
true. So then chapter 4 goes into a
Montage.
training session. What?
It's a training montage.
Tra Yes. Sarah's having a training session with Sir Holland. And he is, I wrote channeling his inner Victor because I know this is the prequel. Technically, one comes before the other. But the way I read it, I met Victor first. So, um,
I agree. I agree with that, man. Let me just say, like, Victor was very subtle in his advice and messages to Poppy. Sir Holland ain't. He's like ominous to the T. Like he's a spitting fortune cookie. Like,
which like it's funny because later on in the book, which obviously we'll go into, but like later on in the book, it's like I said all I could without interfering, and you're like, bruh, you pretty much sprinkled the breadcrumbs, and all I had to do was keep eating, and then I would get to where I was going.
he's
Like,
like,
what do
I
you
didn't
mean?
directly interfere. And he's like, there's a line and he's dancing along it as he's talking to her. And
It's like
it's like,
the salt circles, and he's just kind of, ooh, you can't get me. Ooh, you can't get me.
and both of
Anyway,
them are like, I don't see how that's not interfering, but you couldn't tell us this, that's interfering. Oh, I love it. We'll get to that later, but yeah, a little fortune
yeah.
cookie.
S- uh, mm,
He's telling her they're doing this training, and
yeah.
he brings up the topic of an honorable death.
Mm-hmm.
Like, cause she's a killing machine. She's basically like, if they've done this shit, like, why do they need an honorable death? Like, why do I need to care about that? And he says, besides the fact that a dying mortal can still wield a weapon, an enemy is rarely won by choice. They usually become such due to other people's choices, or they become enemies because of situations they had little control over. I would think you, of all people, would be more empathetic to that.
Which I think is funny because that's another parallel between the other books because it's they both discuss honorable deaths. They both have
Mm-hmm.
their own views on it, I guess.
Yeah. It also shows the similarities and difference between Sarah and Poppy, where Poppy was all about honorable deaths, whereas Sarah struggles with that. She's like, why should I care if these people have an honorable death?
Yeah, and then that goes into like Sarah's feelings about like why didn't he want me kind of vibe. Um and Sir Holland is just like you're not unworthy, you're not a curse or anything like that. You carry the ember of life in you. You carry hope within you. You carry the possibility of a future. You don't know what the primal of death thinks. And I'm just like, one, bruh, could you have been any more blatant with
Walking
your
fortune
words?
cookie, honey.
Two, she doesn't realize it at this point, but like the this book walks a very fine line of understanding your worth and like how do I say this? It very much is a book like questioning your worth, and this is something that she struggles with throughout this whole book. Um, and is that a spoiler? I don't know if that's a spoiler. I'm gonna say it, and if it's a spoiler, I will cut it out. But I think earlier when we were talking about Satoria and she's being introduced, it's you don't get the full story right away. And I think it's tragedy breeds tragedy, I think. And it's very much like a whole parallel thing that you can sympathize with.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like figuring out your worth. And then all these people keep comparing her to Satoria or like she thinks about Satoria. And it's just like, why are you guys like she didn't want to be here. Like why like I don't know. I don't think that really helped her in her figuring out her worth and like wanting to like be the change she wishes to see in her world kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I upon reflection I'm like was that really smart to tell her? Like I don't know.
Right. And then I think it's funny because when he's trying to help her, like, realize that, she's not unworthy and things like that, it goes back to when we see him later in the book, how he's like, I couldn't tell you that things weren't connected to you, this kind of stuff. He literally says right here, what is happening with the raw is not your fault. And I'm just like, oh, he's really towing that
But
line of I
she's
didn't interfere. She didn't
but
believe him.
she
No.
doesn't believe him. She doesn't think that he understands like what's
Mhm.
actually going on. Joke's on her.
Right.
Um so
Oh
yeah, so
yeah.
then they're talking about the deal and he calls her a princess and she goes, "Don't call me that." And he's like she's like, "I'm not a princess." And he goes, "Really? Then what are you?" Um, "You are not bait, you are a trap. And maybe I had become nothing more than a flesh and blood weapon." So that's another thing. It's like she's been groomed this entire time for this one sole purpose. And so was Poppy. Poppy was literally brainwashed to, become this whole chosen maiden kind of vibe. They just took it to two different extremes. These people be
Yeah.
crazy. Um, and it
Um
and it ends with you said I was touched by death and life. What does that mean to be touched by both? She's talking to Odetta. I'm sure I'm gonna mispronounce every name in this book, but that's okay.
I'm not even pulling up the thing. I've just given up. We're gonna see what we say.
And Odetta's like only the fates can tell you what that means. Hmm.
Another fortune cookie. She's
I
not
love
as
that.
fortunate as Holland, but
Pretty
she's
fortunate.
fortunate enough. Oh, and then
Uh,
we learn some background about her father.
correct.
She's in the sitting room, the queen's sitting room, where technically she's not supposed to be, but fuck her mom.
True.
Um, she's looking at a picture of her dad, and we learn that she looks kind of like him, kind of not, but he died shortly after her birth, having leapt from Wayfarer's East Tower. No one ever said why, no one ever spoke of it, but I often wondered if my birth, the reminder of what his forefathers had done, have driven him to it. What a heavy thought to have on your head, to think my birth is what made my father do that.
I think that that's very relatable though, because I know, I mean, going through grief, it's
Mhm.
very much like you can't help but partially blame yourself. So I completely see how, like, where she's thinking in this moment, like why she feels this way. And I really like how in this book they very much they don't they're not going to tell you the whole thing in this one book. Like there are obviously more books for us to read to get the full story, but it's very much a you learn that like everything is not as it seems. Everything just like with Poppy and Cass, like everything is not how we think it's supposed to be. There are
Mhm.
plot twists and stuff like that, but I think the biggest realization is her growth because she's been going through all this stuff and she has all these thoughts, but that doesn't change how confident and assertive she is.
Yeah.
And I think that that is such a key thing to note is like, despite all of these things that she thinks or feels, she still perseveres. She's still trying to fulfill this quote unquote destiny that she's been pre
Yeah. I think
manipulated to
a
fulfill.
big show of that growth is in this book specifically, the theme of the book could be she doesn't care about her life. She's
Mhm.
reckless because she doesn't give a shit. She thinks she's gonna die anyways if she fulfills this prophecy, because she's like, I'm gonna kill a primal. There's no way I'm gonna live long after that. Like, he has these guards and things like that. So she's, especially when he rejected her, that increased it even farther of her value of her life. And but that doesn't stop her for standing up for things that she is right. So I think it's a shift of she doesn't care about herself, but she's still gonna stand up for herself, to her confidence coming into herself, and that correlates with her. Like, it's just that shifting of the thought behind what you're doing.
Yeah, I think she gained or she produced a level of acceptance because I think at the end of the day, like I don't think she wanted this for her. You know what I mean? Like it's not like she wanted this for herself, but I think she accepted where this would lead,
Yeah.
which doesn't make it better, but I think that that is like a clear difference. It's just like the you can tell like her value of her life, but also I think she's just at a point like with how she was brought up, like like I fear death, like in a like a
Same.
uh whatever the term is called. I fear death, and so it's like we can make self-deprecating comments and like XYZ thing, but at the end of the day, I'm terrified of death. Like I like that's just something that I'm just like, she just reached a point where she's just like, I've accepted that this is where my life trajectory is supposed to go. So it's
Hmm.
just one of those things where she doesn't realize her destiny can change, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's really one of
She.
the tragic things is like she is so confident, so strong-willed, so brave, like he says,
Hmm.
and like she just
But
was
she's been
dealt
taught
a
there's only
hand.
one end.
Yeah.
There's one end for you, and that's your death. But you got to save our kingdom before you die. So she's looking at this picture of her dad, and she sees, in his eyes they were haunted, in this portrait of him. And she talks about how she thinks like his death took a part of her mother. She says, I often wonder if they were mates of the heart, I wonder where we heard that before. If there's even such a thing that was written about it in poems and songs, two halves of a whole, it was said that the touch between one was full of energy and that their souls would recognize one another. It was even said that they could walk in the dreams of another and that the loss of one wasn't something repairable. I have comments I could make about that, but I can't, so I'm not gonna. But but
But
but
we're
she said
not
if
gonna.
mates, yeah, if mates of the heart were something more than legend, then she would believe that would be her mother and her father, and that she thinks that her mother might blame her partly for his death.
Which really, like, I hate the mom. Do not get me wrong
Mm.
when I'm about to say what I'm about to say. I can see how she got to that conclusion. Do
Oh
I
yeah.
think it's right? Absolutely not. But I can see where she got to that conclusion. But she's having this whole like reminiscing, feeling feels for her dad, and then her mom comes in with a seamstress
Blech.
and a handmaid. I don't know, seamstress and a handmaiden, I think. So I don't know. She comes in with two women.
I think it's just Andrea,
I
the
thought there were two of them.
seamstress.
Anyway, and she's all like, "What are you doing in here? Get the F out of here."
Oh,
Okay,
Lady
deuces.
Kala. Lady Kala's with them. Yeah, you're
I
right.
told you there were two people. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, so then she kicks her out of the room.
She calls
Deuces.
her
And
handmaiden.
it's
Mm.
disrespectful, to be honest with you. And so she then goes to a little bit of time goes on, and she goes out and she notices that they're uh gods. Less than a block, I saw him. Oh yeah. She saw Mattis. I was trying to think of which god it was. Did I pronounce that wrong? Probably. But that's besides the point. Anyway, so then she notices that they're leaving a place called Jonas Designs, which spoiler, Andrea's last name is Jonas. And so she's dead. And
Ah man, but the dress. But
after
the
a whole 2
dress.
seconds, and homegirl's going to investigate whatever, and she gets spooked and big stabs Mr. Man.
Yeah, when they first went to the first house, he got after her for not checking that the house was empty
Mm-hmm.
beforehand. So she went into this house and surprise, surprise, didn't check it. And a certain god of ours that we've met came up behind her and startled her. And so she straight up stabby stabbed. Not
Stabby
directly in the
stabbed.
heart. She knows that she missed by like an inch or
Yeah,
so.
which is
But
fine.
you
And so
know.
then they're going back and forth about stabbing. And he's just like, it's stung. He's like annoyed. He's like, this is obnoxious. You're annoying. And they're going back and forth, you know, blaming each other for her stabbing him because whatever.
You
Freaking
stab everyone who grabs you? Yes.
mood. And he keeps calling her Liesa. And she
And we
doesn't
love it.
know what that means, but we know what that
Oh,
means.
oh, but I think it's important. Yeah, he keeps calling her Liesa, but while they're arguing about her stabbing him, Homeboy straight up destroys her dagger.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah. Like I'm thinking of like Poppy and her dagger and how it like it keeps reappearing. So I thought it was gonna have like that somehow lucky penny. No, he straight up just
doses.
destroys it, like pulverizes it with his ether, and it's just like, oh,
And she's pissed. She's
pissed.
pissed. I would be too though, so in her defense. Um, and so then they're talking about fear and like he's just like, "Are you afraid? Like what's going on?" And he says, "You may feel terror, but you're not terrified, and there is a kingdom's worth of difference between the two." And this goes back to her not valuing her life and like how she feels about this whole situation. Um, which is also funny because she's just like, "How would you know? Are you a god of thoughts and emotions?" Hmm.
The fact that
Anyway,
he kept it together when she asked that, man.
honestly.
Uh,
And so they're going back and forth, and he's just like, Any primal or god can do whatever they please, but every cause has an effect. There are always consequences for every action, even if they don't impact him directly. And then they go into like background about what happens after death, about the veil and what's abyss?
That's
Yes.
why I call it.
That yeah,
Abyss.
yeah. No, I know that that was the how you pronounce it. I just wanted to confirm that that was the word.
Sorry, I thought. Yes, abyss.
Um,
So sorry.
it's okay. And so there are a lot of moments in this book where she smells the scent of stale lilacs, and if we go back to our other book, our other series with our favorite people, stale lilacs represent death, more or less, some sort of deadish thing, something like that.
Fresh lilacs smell good. Stale lilacs smell bad. There is your guide for the lilac smell.
Exactly. So they're going back and forth, whatever, and it turns out that Mattis, sure, didn't kill Andrea, turned her into a monster. Dun dun dun.
Which, I mean, I think
Wait,
I'm pretty sure it's easy to encipher what kind of monster this is, because I mean,
it's giving.
yeah, it's giving Craven. Like,
Anyway, but
I just
we're
don't
not
know what
introduced to
it
that,
is. Yeah.
which is funny because this comes before that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There are a
no,
lot of
it's
things where,
yeah, you kind of see where things start and you think,
yeah,
oh, this was the first in this, but no, a lot of it happened here. And so it's
yeah,
funny to see them see this and even a primal. Oh god, we don't know he's a primal yet, but he's a primal. Is like, I have no idea what this thing is.
exactly.
So it's like this is like the start of all that.
Exactly. And then the chapter ends with her with him calling her Liesa again, and she finally asks him what it means. And he said it has different meanings to different people, but all of them mean something beautiful and powerful. And that's how chapter
And that
6
sticks with her throughout like the whole
ends.
book. Like that's something
Oh,
she'll reference to herself all the time, is like when she's feeling like that versus when she's not feeling like that.
I got it tattooed on me. It's so impactful to me too. You didn't
I
get it tattooed on
didn't.
you.
No, shut
No,
up.
but you got the dagger, but it's okay.
Thinking about
So
getting it somewhere. Anyways.
chapter 7 and 8, very quick chapters, not a lot to say here, but essentially Sarah asks about this Craven-esque situation, not so many words, to Sir Holland, and he's like, "What are you talking about, girlfriend?" And Ezra comes in, Sarah's stepsister, asks her to help her with rescuing a little girl's brother from this gross man, sex trade man.
Eh.
So the two chapters are essentially the build up into her saving the brother. And Ezra, it's really funny because Ezra makes a comment that's like, don't wear something that like you don't mind getting blood on. And she's like, what do you mean? It's not like I'm not gonna kill the
I'm
guy.
just
Like
gonna
it's
get a
not gonna get to
kid.
that point. Yeah, I'm just saving the boy. And of course it ends up with her ixnaying sex trade gross man.
Getting blood all
And
over her.
yeah, got blood all over her, and but they reunited the siblings, so that's always great.
Woohoo.
Um, so then chapter 9, we are introduced to her beautiful, beautiful lake,
Yes.
which is funny. I love that well, Cass has the caverns, and then I like how Sarah
Sarah
has
has
this
a
lake.
lake. Yeah.
Um, but it's in the
Especially
Dark
when you find
Elms.
out like the like what this lake actually
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, which is funny because they're both I mean, we can just say it since it happens
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
book, but um I think it's funny because they're both drawn to it. Sarah's drawn to this lake because of her connection to Ash, and then Cass is drawn like Cass and Kieran were drawn, or was it Cat was Kieran also, yeah, because they were
Cass,
bonded.
Kieran,
They
Malik,
were
yeah.
yeah, they were all kind of gravitated toward
The
those caverns.
caverns. Yeah,
Yeah, I
which
think that
went
that's insane.
underground. Yeah.
I like how she like
Oh.
writes similar storylines, but they have their own little tidbits that are
And I feel
different.
like people get upset about that. They're like, oh, this feels too similar. And it's like, well, it's the same universe. Like, there's going to be a lot of similarities. It's the same
And
magic, it's
she's
the same
related.
stuff. Yeah.
And she's related to them, so it feels very organic.
Yeah. I liked it. I liked how it was done.
Anyway, so
We're
she
in these
goes,
wolves. Wolves? We're in these
we're in
woods.
the woods. And
There
she comes
is the
across a
wolf.
wolf that is not
Tiny
having a
wolf.
great time.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and she uses her powers to resurrect this wolven.
Not heal, straight up resurrect, man.
Resurrect. And that is our first hint of her powers.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn that she's only been doing it for animals and never on another human being.
We kind of had a hint of what it was when she was with Odetta, because she thought Odetta was dead when she first got there, and she went to like touch her, and she was like, "Don't do that."
Yes. Which is funny because when I first read this book, it was very much like, oh, is this like a Poppy situation? Like I was trying to figure out what the power actually
Yeah,
was.
yeah,
Um, because it could be like a sensory kind of vibe, not necessarily a resurrect.
right,
So I was interested to see how they were gonna do that. But this is the first real tint, like
yeah.
actual use that she needed it for, which I thought was interesting. And then she like senses someone watching her. Shocker. Um, and it turns out to be Ash.
Yeah.
Spoiler, it's
She's
Ash.
nude, by the way. She gets nude because she's covered in blood, gets in this lake, and she's like, "Oh, someone's here," and he's already in the lake. He's behind the waterfall that she doesn't go to because she can't swim, and
Yeah.
homeboy's like tall as hell. So, so yeah, she has a friend in the lake with her, and they're both nude, so it's fun.
Yep.
I
Huh.
go ahead. I was
No,
just
I was
gonna say I so the part where she says that she talks about how like chilled the water is, and like she was an idiot one time and jumped into it without like preparing, like by touching the water first, and like she almost drowned, and it made me think of the Bolt Her Taylor Swift song. Anyways, uh but I also like how she wrote out like how we all feel going into the water when like it's like, okay, I'm getting adjusted to it, and then like it gets to like sensitive areas and it's like, oh, sorry, I just thought that was funny. And yeah,
and then we go into chapter 10 and Ash reveals himself taking a swim.
don't laugh at me.
Um, and we are enjoying the views. All of the views, nothing, not no views are not being enjoyed. And she asks, like, is Ash short for something? And he goes, Ash is short for many things. Foreshadowing to later in the book.
Ominous. I like how they fight about being in the lake, and she's like, "Why were you watching me?" And he was like, "I was here first. Like my clothes are there. You obviously didn't pay
Didn't
attention. Like,
notice.
yeah, I've been here first." And she's so stubborn. She's like, "You know what? I don't care. I'm still mad that you're here, just like watching me." And it gets to this point where she had stood up from out of the water, and the water was only like waist high. So homegirl's like breasts out at this man. And he was just like, "In case you're wondering, this is me intentionally staring." And it's just like,
And
I
she stares
love
right
their
back
banter. Oh yeah,
at
she
him,
does.
and she noticed the ink sprawling across the length of his back from the upper swells of his rear all the way to the edges of his hair that she couldn't look away from. In the center of his back was a circular twisted swirl that grew larger,
Oh
lashing out to form the thick tendrils I'd seen reaching around his waist to flow along the inside of his hips. Let me tell you, that tattoo sounds painful as shit.
yeah, especially when you learn that they're like little blood drops. So those are like all those individual dots to make that design.
Yeah, and then he hears something and he's like, you should probably get dressed. And she's like, they're just spirits. Like, there's nothing in these woods. Whatever. Like, no one comes here. And he was like, so what do you call these things? And she's like, what things? And well, spoiler alert.
They were only shadows, but then I saw something drifting out of the darkness between the elms, a figure cloaked in black. A nightmare. Yes, they are.
Yep, an unearthly moan filled the air, and the trees shuddered in response. The hunters moved in unison, sweeping forward in a V. Let me tell you, these things, these little creepy crawlers in these books, gross me out.
Mm-hmm. And like she's
Like
like, what are they? And he's like, definitely not wayward spirits. And she's like, no, really? And then
germs,
germs. Mm.
germs.
I call them
Listen,
germs. You call them germs. I don't care. Like they're disgusting either way. They have snakes in them. I don't care what they're called. They need to die.
correct.
Oh,
Um, she and like she wouldn't. Another form of her being brave is like she's like I hadn't run it from anything since I was a child, and I wouldn't start now. And he tells her to sever their heads or destroy their hearts. It's the only way to put them down.
which is very interesting because the germs that we were introduced to first before these ones, it didn't matter where you stabbed them. You just had to stab them and they like poof. So this is where we kind of learn there's different types
Yes, they break
of
it down
germs.
in
Yeah.
terms of classification. And
Mm-hmm.
then she learned that they're made of snakes, or they're snakes inside. Ugh. Anyway, snakes, and so she falls and hits her head.
Yeah, her and Poppy don't like snakes. That's something they definitely
I
are
don't like
related about.
creepy crawlies. I don't like buzzy things. If there's anything, I would have been on the ground crying, fetal position, crying.
Yep.
And he stays with her, and like she's coming out of this daze of her falling and calls him beautiful, but
Mm-hmm.
she thinks she's thinking it, but she says it out loud, and he's just like, are you good? Because you complimented me there.
He's like, I'm worried
Um,
you hit your head harder than I believe. That was the first nice thing you've said to me.
exactly. And then he kind of gives a background on hunters and seekers, which are the different classes of germs. And then there are other classes, but those are the main ones. Um, then there are those who enter servitude as a way to atone for their sins in lieu of being sentenced to the abyss. They are usually known as sentinels, who are, in a way, soldiers. The priests fall into that group. They are more mortal than the first group in the sense that they have their own thoughts. This is the most brief, how do I say this? This is like a very brief way to kind of build the world, because when you think about it, so like I've read books like The Hobbit, and I tried to read Game of Thrones, and this is a very clear and concise way to be like, this is a thing that's in this universe. This is what they do. These are the different types, and it's very clear and concise. I respect that and I appreciate that, because let me
Yeah.
tell you, my
It's
brain
like
would
a one
melt.
time it's like a one-time explanation. And then the
Mm-hmm.
next it's not like every time you see them, something new is brought up about them. Like I mean, very minor things, but the overall, like who they are, it's very quick. This is what they are. Move on,
And
kind of
like it
thing. But
makes sense.
yeah, and she brought up a good point though, because they were talking about him, and he said like the serpents replace their insides, so they're not like, and that's why. But she's like, I don't know if I want to know this, but do the priests in the temples have snakes in them? Because these germs also have their mouth stitched. And he says, I have to agree with you. You probably not wanting to know the answer to that. And I'm just like, huh, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to ever see them again.
Mood.
Uh,
And then they're going back and forth, and he is pretty much just saying, I was not spying on you, and I'm willing to bet that you know that by now. However, you were staring at me quite openly, I might add, as I walked out of the lake. So he's like, so he challenges her, and he's like, why haven't you left? And well, I wouldn't leave either. I don't blame her.
yeah.
And so she goes into the next chapter, goes into her being like, good point, like
Yeah.
fair. This is fine. Um,
Oh,
and so
well, she said that that was a good question. He said, or a pointless one. And she said, why? And he said, because we both know why you remained right where you are. I interest you, you interest me. So here we remain.
I mean, they macked a little bit, so clearly, like they were
Yeah,
interested
they're
in each
about to
other.
do
That
it
seemed normal.
again.
Um, and then they go back and forth, and he goes, "You are entirely contradictory," um, because they're talking about um killing. someone? Oh yeah. She asked
Yeah.
if he killed a lot. And so he was telling her how only when I had to. Has it been a lot? I'm sure to some it has been, to others probably not something they'd blink an eye at, but I haven't enjoyed any. And so she apologizes and he's like, an apology? And she's like, I shouldn't have asked that question in the first place. It's not any of my business. And so he's like, you are entirely contradictory. I remember the first time I had to kill somebody. I remember how the sword felt in my hand, how it felt as if it weighed double. I can see the look on his face. I will never forget what he said. Do it. Those were his words. Do it. And he's like, no death has been easy, but that one will always leave the deepest mark. He was a friend. And you learn later in the book that like he hadn't told anybody about this, like him killing his friend.
This is
Um,
the first time he's mentioned it.
yeah. And so I and this goes back to the whole Poppy and Cass, like, is this real? Is this make believe? Like, are their feelings genuine? Like it's like a whole thing. Um, and then she's asking him more questions like, what is the veil like? And he goes, what awaits in the veil cannot be shared with anyone, mortal or god. Not even primals can enter the veil. But the rest of the Shadowlands is like an entryway, a village before the city. It is beautiful in its own way, but it was once one of the most magnificent regions in all of Elysium. And then we learn of Dalos. We already knew about Dalos from the last book
Yep.
series. But here we learn that it's the city of gods where the prime of life, Collis, and his court resides.
Yep.
Which, in Poppy and Cass's world, we don't know all of that. We
I think
know
we know it's the
Dallas's
city of gods,
gods,
but
but I
that's
think that
it.
that's it.
Yeah, they were just told, do not enter there. You'll never return from Elysium. And that's really all they know of Elysium in general. Like,
That's
they
what
don't know
yeah.
anything else about it other than that.
And then they mac more, and well, we already talked about how we're not going to talk about that.
He says he has one decent, kind bone when it comes to her. And I'm just like, that's an innuendo if I ever heard one.
I mean, true.
Um, but then they kiss. Yeah.
And then
I like
chapter
how they like
13.
kiss. And then he was like, that was barely a kiss. And then they kiss.
Um,
Anyways.
correct. So the beginning of that chapter. Anyway, spicy eggs and dicey is what I wrote in the show notes. And she wants to take it further, and he's like, "You're gonna regret this," and he makes a comment about how he doesn't have much experience with everything debauching entails, and she's just like, "Wait, what?" Like she was trying to process it, and she was like, does he mean this?" And then like they went a different direction with it. So she thinks about it later. She reflects on that later.
I love that because I think this is one of the very few books I've read where
Where the
it's
man
very
doesn't have
opposite.
experience.
Yeah, where it's the
Yeah.
man learning from the woman. Like, and once he like gets the hang of it, he gets confident and a little overly confident in some points with how he talks about it. But like, I just like that dynamic, and it was fun to see that from such a different perspective.
Yeah, I like so they're making out and doing all this stuff and like they separate and she describes this as a sense of loss that had nothing to do with where the kisses had or hadn't led, nor even the absence of contact. It felt like meeting a friend and then immediately losing them. And I think that this also just further solidifies like this bond that they have. Of course, she doesn't know who he is yet, but
Right. Or why she even feels this way. Yeah.
exactly. Spicy, 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 spicy,
Spicy,
spicy.
spicy, eggs and dicey.
Yeah, and then the end of the chapter, she heard a sound that had been strangely absent. The birds, they called out to one another, singing their songs as life stirred once more in the woods.
See, she italicizes birds like that, and I think of the movie, and sorry,
Not
that's
sure.
my brain distracted.
Yeah,
Chapter
so then
14.
yeah, chapter 14, and she's sitting there reminiscing while Ezra's trying to give her some lowdown, and she's just like, "Where have you been?" And Sarah was like, "Oh, I got caught up at the lake." And she didn't feel like kind of explaining herself and Ash or anything to Ezra.
Yeah.
And then they go through a discourse of how Ezra was saying that Sarah should be the queen, the right or is the rightful queen, and Sarah's
Mhm.
like Ezra's the rightful queen. Um
Because you are
and
the queen the people of Lysania need. And
exactly.
Sarah's like, ha, 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 ha,
Joke's on you.
ha.
Um yeah, so then another difference between difference but similarity is Sarah goes to the kind of farmlands to check on, the rot, how much it's spread, and check on the specific family. And there are lots more references to stale lilacs, but also something that's similar to Poppy is Poppy was doing the death with dignity. And I think Sarah caring for the people in this way is very much like she was bringing,
Mhm.
bruised apples and potatoes,
Yeah.
apples and potatoes. And she's just checking on the people. And I think it shows their compassion, and I think that that's something that they
Yeah.
both
Especially
share.
since one aspect is that, like, Duke Tierman in the first
Ugh.
books would sometimes withhold food from her. And Sarah experienced that same thing where after she was rejected and continued to be rejected, like they stopped sending food to her altogether. She basically had to figure out how to like sneak in and get her own food kind of thing. And that's why Ezra goes to her. She's like, "You have a talent for getting food out of the kitchen." And
She
so
has no
instead of
choice.
just yeah, so instead of just like taking that for herself, she's doing that
Giving it to the people.
to give to people too. And I like Orlano, the cook, because
Yeah.
he gives her a hard time, but he still helps her out. He still gives
Yeah.
her the food. He's just like, "Don't risk my job, but here you go."
Yeah, exactly. And so she's bringing all this. So she's checking on one family, and then she goes to the main family she was going to check on, and they drank some poison and
Yeah.
they passed. And so she's pissed, and the next chapter goes into her needing to see the king. And
Ugh.
she like pretty much is just like um try me to the guards because she was telling them to move out of the way. And so she's seeing the king and Tavius are in the room meeting together. And she's just like, why can't we like ration off the food that we have in this palace, like, to the people? And Tavius throws a daypole at her, and he's an idiot, and I hate him. And
So
it's so
much.
funny. The stepfather, who's the king, goes like tells Tavius to leave. And so Tavius leaves, and she's like, "I'm fine. And I would have been better if you hadn't stopped me." And the king goes, "I'm sure you would be, but if I hadn't, you'd have likely seriously injured him." Just like mood.
Yeah.
So then she's telling him about her concerns or whatever, and then she leaves. And there's this person who works for the palace, some staff member. It's just like, "I need help, help me," and it's a trap,
Yep.
big old trap. We love a
Big
trap,
old
and
trap. Wait, I know, right? Hadn't had a
um,
plot twist in a while.
nope. And so the next chapter goes into her being attacked by guards that were paid off by Tavius. Spoiler, because he's an ass. And so she defends herself, and her mom and a god who we later find out is a god named Callum um find her. And she's like, "Oh, I found them this way." And she goes to the staff member, and she's like, "Right?" And because she obviously doesn't want them to know that she killed them. And
Right.
so the staff member agrees, and um she gets out of that situation, and we're introduced to Ector, who brings Sarah the Shadowstone dagger um from Ash. And she said she was giving background of how she's never received a gift. And she's like, "Not on the rights when gifts were often exchanged among family and friends, not on my birthday, but I had been given a gift now, a beautiful, useful, and wholly unexpected one, and it had been a god who'd given it to me, Ash." And I think
Oh,
that's so beautiful.
and then how did it pass? I hate that it ends with such a beautiful thing.
And then
And
the
then the
first line
next
is Odetta
chapter is
passed.
Odetta passed the next into the veil early in the morning of the following day. And I'm just like, well, that's a mood killer.
Oh, 100%. And so Ezra and Sir Holland supported Sarah during the funeral.
We love
Training she
supports during funerals, man.
Oh, mood. And so training was cut short. She tried to have a training session with Holland, but her jaw was aching. She had a headache. She had queasiness. So Sir Holland gave her a tea to help her feel better. And Sir Holland tells Sarah that she reminds him of Sotoria. Um,
Yes.
and he was saying that Sotoria rose and wasn't because he was telling her how she was resurrected. And Sotoria rose and wasn't grateful for such an act. She was frightened and unhappy. The one responsible couldn't understand why she was so morose. Nothing he did made her better or made her love him.
Love him
Um,
either.
mood. And so she went to the right, and it was the first time she'd seen Collis, the primal of life, and she noticed how he looked similar to the god Callum, and and
She's also bleeding while she brushes her teeth. That's another thing that's like, what in the world?
yeah, another thing. And the chapter ends with Ezra needing help, and Sarah goes, "Do you need help burying a body?" And Ezra goes, "Good gods, I hope you're joking," but she wasn't.
Nope.
And she was like, "Though you are who I would come to if I did need help burying a body. I feel as if you would be adeptly skilled at such an endeavor, and I know you would take that secret to your grave." And
Yep.
Ezra essentially wants Sarah to res Marisol, who we learn is the love of her life. I love a good Ezra
Happy
Marisol
Pride.
moment. Happy Pride. So going into chapter 18, Ezra remembers Sarah resurrecting her cat Butters and says that like it's only us that needs to know the truth. And Sarah's just like, "Do you love her?" And Ezra goes, or Sarah asks her if she loves her, and Ezra goes, "Yes, I love her very much." And Sarah goes, "Love, I wonder what it felt like to care for someone so deeply and completely that you would be willing to do anything for them." So Sarah wills Mara's soul back to life, and Ezra is like, "You're a blessing, Sarah, no matter what anyone believes. Says or believes you are a blessing. You always have been. You need to know that." And then she's like, "Shit, I did what Odetta warned me and played like a primal because she used her powers."
We got fighting like gods, and now we have playing like a primal.
That's okay. That's fine. And then we go to chapter 19 where I'm tired of Tavius's ass. Do you know how many times I had to type Tavius and I was like the entire time? Um,
Tavius. Four at
yep.
least in chapter 19's notes.
Yep. Essentially Tavius is being a big, huge creep, and he's drunk and weird and says that he's the king because his dad passed in his sleep, and he captures her and
Do you think this is something I was thinking when I was reading?
no.
I know that it doesn't always work this way, but what the coinkadink of she brought someone back to life, and in that same night, her stepdad dies.
Okay, so in my brain, I went Tavius killed him. But like
I
your
thought that
thing makes
I
more
thought that
sense.
too, but I thought like that balance of life kind of thing, like you saved one person's life, so who took her place?
That's
Like,
valid.
that's where my brain goes. It's not really
That's
mentioned, but that's what I kept thinking of during this chapter.
that honestly tracks.
Because it's
Um,
very coincidental. Because they never said anything about him having any health issues.
no, he
Like,
just had a heart attack in his sleep,
yeah,
or a heart thing in his sleep. That
yeah. It
honestly
could
that
be
makes
his
sense.
son, but yeah, I don't. Both of them could either be. But yeah, Tavius is in her bed. I would hate to wake up and see him
Creeping on
in.
me? Yeah.
Yeah,
And then he captures her, and yeah, she smart mouths him, and he's like, "You are a treasonous bitch," or some shit,
yeah.
and
She
then he
said, "You'll
starts
never
trying
be
to
my king," and he's like, "I hoped you'd say that."
yeah, so then he starts whipping her, and she's all like, "Please kindly go fuck yourself." And I'm like, "Mood, girlfriend." And then Ezra and Sarah's mom is just like, "What the fuck are you doing, my dude?" And all we see is as the shadows, all of them that filled the hall, retracted as if drawn back to him, I knew who stood in the center without even seeing his face or any features inside the pulsing mass of midnight. Ooh, say that 10 times real fast. That stretched up and outward in the shape of massive wings that blocked the sun's light. Death had finally returned. And then the next chapter, it goes into her realizing that it was Ash. This man she has
Yep.
macked on, disrespected.
She's like, oh, the primal's here, but wait a minute. That's Ash. And it's like, oh shit. Things get this is where like if you see our show notes, this is where things actually start to get filled out a lot.
Correct.
Yeah.
He is Tavius is like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I am known as the Asher." And she goes, "Is it short for something?" I'd asked when he told me his name. It is short for many things. The one who is blessed, I am the guardian of souls and the primal god of common men and endings. I am Nyktos, ruler of the Shadowlands, the primal of death. Dun dun
I love
dun.
hearing his full title because in the first book, they they heard him referred to as the primal god of common men and endings. And everyone's like, no, that's Rain. Like, who's the like that's not Nyktos. And so here it is, his full title, and it's like, oh, the things they don't know, and here's some of the truth that we get to see.
Yep. And so Nyktos and Ector and Scion are making sure that Sarah's okay. And Ector goes, he seems angry. And Scion goes, well, he's been moody lately. And then they're like, let him have his fun. And then Pike, like an idiot, is just like, I'm not going out like this. And he flips a bow and
So
fires
stupid.
at Ash. Um, and Ash goes, you should have thought about that, because Tavius is all like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. And he's all like, you should have thought about that before you picked up that whip and touched what is mine. And Sarah's like, what is mine? Question mark.
I
And
like how she's like, now he claimed me.
then Sarah, big Tavius, big dead. Um, and Sarah is telling Ezra to take the throne. And and so Sarah is just like, Nyktos, the primal of death, afraid of a mortal girl. And he's like, I'm not foolish enough to underestimate a mortal, female or not, especially after what I just saw you do. And then he goes, and don't call me that. And she goes, Nyktos, that's your name. And then Nyktos goes, I am not that to you. And I very much am just like, oh, it's a whole Hawk, Cass, Ash,
I know.
Nyktos, Wombo-y combo. I will say, oh, and then she learns that
He
he
always
always knew
knew. Yep.
who she was, and she's mad at him for not fulfilling the deal until now. But I think when I first read this book, which now I'm just like, how the hell did I get this confused? But Nyktos and Nectus, I was like, this is so confusing. There's too many ends and my brain does not compute what's happening. But then you like, they obviously have different personalities and they're completely different like entities. But I
Mhm.
was just like, this is so confusing. My brain hurts. And now I'm just like, oh, I love them both.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's confusing for a second because sometimes I'll go to say Nyctos by saying Nectus and vice versa. And I
Yeah.
like have to like think os, not s.
Yeah.
But
So then
yeah.
we go into chapter 21. And he's essentially just like, you just killed the king. We can't, like, you can't stay here.
Yeah, you're not
And
safe.
I'm not gonna leave you here. And she was like, well, you were getting ready to kill him. And he was like, yeah, but I'm a primal. Your mortal laws regarding killing pieces of shit men don't apply to me. You wanted his death. I do not doubt for 1 second that you earned it. And she's like, you're only fulfilling the deal so I don't face the executioner's block. And he's like, is that now just occurring to you? And then he like looks at her and he's like, wait, it is. Do you not value your life at all? And that is
It's
such a
the theme
big
of the
theme.
book. Like if
Literally
there's
such
one
a big theme.
sentence I could put to like summarize this book, it's do you not value your life at all?
Pretty much.
Yep.
Um, and so he's honoring the deal and she's wants to say goodbye to everyone. And he's like, yeah, you can't say goodbye. And she's like, why? And he said, because if I see the woman who may be your mother again, I am likely to kill her for pleading for that shit's life. Mood.
Yep.
Um, so then they are traveling to the Shadowlands and they enter the Dark Elms and he's like she notices that it's her lake And he's like, "Your lake. Interesting that you feel a sense of ownership to this lake. Is it because of how it made you feel? How did you describe it? Calming, perhaps at home?" And he goes, "Your lake is a gateway to the Shadowlands."
Yep. Only those from Elysium know how to find and reveal them and use them. And I had put a note there. And I'm wondering, do you think we'll see that in the future books? Like, because, and I say future books because, I mean, if you've read all the series, you know that even with this storyline, we don't know everything yet. But because
Correct.
no one in the first storyline is from Elysium, they wouldn't know about these gateways. So part of me wonders if with all these. Mm, sorry, I was about to say something and I'm like, I can't say that yet. Part of me just wonders if that's going to come back up. That's I'll tell you what I'm
Possible.
thinking later.
It's possible. Um, anyway. So, and then
Through
she's
the
just like,
lake.
"Why didn't you?" She was like, "Why didn't you like tell me who you were before?" And he said, because you spoke with no fear, you acted fearlessly each time I saw you. You interested me and I hadn't expected that. I didn't want that, but at the lake you were just Seraphina. And I was just Ash. There was no deal, no perceived obligations. You stayed simply because you wanted to. I stayed only because I wanted to. You let me touch you because that was what you wanted, not because you felt as if you had to. Maybe I should have told you, but I was enjoying myself with you. I wasn't ready for that to end. And then he took me to the Shadowlands.
I
And I
love,
think how I love how raw that is.
yeah, I love that he called her Seraphina because she's never told him her name, and so that's just further proof that like he knew who she was. That he was just like, you were just Seraphina, and she's like, he knows my name.
Knows I exist. He sees me.
Oh my gosh, he knows my name.
Okay, so then the Shadowlands, we get there, and it's dark, but it's not night. So there's stars, but there's no moon. I thought that this was very interesting because especially if you live in the north, like it gets dark at like 4 p.m. And I'm like, when I visited Vermont for the first time, well, the only time, I don't know why I said for the first time, I was like going to bed because I couldn't adjust because like
Mhm.
you associate sleeping with darkness, so it's just one of those things. So I thought that was very interesting. And she's just like, "Well, how do you know like when to
When to
like go to
sleep.
bed?" And he was like, "You go to sleep when you're tired." Like, what do you mean?
That's such an odd concept for me. I'm just like, what? But no, it makes me think of Alaska. Like there's like in Alaska when it's getting summertime, it hits this point where the sun doesn't fully go down. But it does kind of like dip to the horizon and it's like that twilighty feel for like hours. And so I imagine that's what it feels like. It's where it's like it's not light, but it's not dark.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
like
just
this in
such a
between.
weird limbo.
Um, yeah, so then the Draken enter the chat. So we see Draken a lot more in this book series. I think it's safe for us to say that. And so Nekdis in his Draken form,
She thought they were
uh,
mountains. They were not mountains.
um, he he wants her to pet him. He wants, yes. And so Ash tells her that and she's like, "Huh? Like this thing can eat me whole." And he's all like, "I don't think this thing can eat you whole." And he's like, and Nexus is kind of offended, like, "Why won't she pet me? Just pet me." And then they go into the difference between dragons and Draken, which
Yep.
I loved that. And then they arrive at Nyctos's home, which is the House of Hades. The wall surrounding it is called the Rise, which, if from the last book,
We know what those
essentially
are. Yeah.
the protection barriers essentially are called the Rise. It encompasses both Hades and the city of L- up to the Black Bay. Listen, y'all can,
I call it Lethe, so
but in my brain, Lethe just sounds better.
yeah.
Um, And she notices as they're going up to the house that people stripped bare and impaled on the wall with some sort of stakes through their hands and their chests. Their heads hung limply, and the stench of death filled the air. Bile climbed my throat as my grip tightened on the pommel. "Why are those people on the wall?" And Ash answered, "They are gods, and they serve as a reminder for all." And she goes, "Of what?" "That life for any being is as fragile as the flame of a candle, easily extinguished and stamped out." And she automatically assumes that he
He
put
put
them
them
on the
there.
wall. And we later learn that he did not do that.
And he was like
Um,
very like incredulous, like, you think I did that? Like,
I know.
no, honey, no. But we
And
meet some
then
people.
we meet Reaver Butt, which,
Reaver
if
butt.
you know from the last book, Reaver is an adult in From Blood and Ash
Mm-hmm.
series, and he's a little baby, quote
Little
unquote
10-year
baby.
old in this. A purplish black winged creature about the height of a medium sized dog, flapping its leathery wings as it nudged the female's hand with its head. Yeah, because he's with a couple people. He's with Rain, which we've heard that name. Theon and Layla, which we've heard those names if you've been paying attention to the names of the gods in the first book. Ector and Scion are there.
And then Eos,
I call her
Eos,
Eos. Yeah.
Eos makes more sense. Actually shows Sarah to her quarters, to like gives her a tour, asks answers all of her questions. Like
Love
Eos is like
Eos.
the goat,
I
literal
was
goat.
so excited to meet Eos
Me too.
in this series, since we hear about her so much when they like cross the Scotos Mountains and when Poppy almost goes off that cliff and stuff. So to actually like meet her, I felt like I was meeting a star almost because reading these books.
That's very valid. And so Eos kind of gives her like Sarah asks like why no one else lives here, and Eos is like it wouldn't be safe for them to do so. Um, and so we go into chapter 23, and she's like, all like Eos is like, you see, all manner of people need to speak with His Highness, and some of them can be a bit unpredictable. Of course, you are completely safe here. And like,
She's doubting that. I would too, honestly, if they said, "Oh, it's not safe."
but then Eos goes, I don't know the circumstances that led to your arrival, but what I do know is that I trust no one in either realm more than Nyktos, nor would I feel safer anywhere else. Did you notice that she said in either realm? I don't know if I put that together. Because they define
Oh,
realms differently, I think,
yeah. The
in these
mortal realm
books.
versus like Elysium.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. All right.
Yeah.
I was like, I
Because
didn't notice that first.
that was the thing with the other timeline was they thought realm. They didn't realize Elysium was connected to Lantia because they thought when they thought realm, they thought like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
somewhere else
That
kind of
concept
thing.
always confused me. But
Yeah.
um um yeah, so then she's like exploring and she sees color. Beyond the washed out courtyard, there were trees, hundreds of them. Thousands of them grew between the palace and the glittering lights of Lethe, and they were nothing like the ones I had seen on the road into the Shadowlands. Their trunks were gray as were the twisted sweeping branches, but their limbs weren't bare. These were full of heart-shaped leaves, leaves the color of blood. Anyone recognize what that means?
Okay,
Anybody?
class, where have we heard this before? Please, someone raise their hand who's been paying attention.
And then Nyktos is taking care of Sarah, and then he reveals that he can read her emotions. Oh,
Mm.
where have we heard that before?
So we have
Um,
one person who can bring back the dead and one person who can read emotions. I
and
wonder who
together,
they're related to.
that was like my main thing. I
Uh,
was just like, oh, I love this so much.
I love that he washes her hair. I know we say he just took care of her, but the fact that he just like let me wash her hair, it's
We
just
love a
like,
man
oh,
that takes care of
honey,
his queen.
yes. It's
Anyway,
kind of, love it.
and then we go into the background of like we go into choice and how like he's just like your family would have allowed you to refuse to take part in the deal, to refuse a primal. Are you saying that you were in a position to refuse one where the expectation hadn't been drilled into you since birth? There was never any consent in your choice. He very much
Oh,
is just like, you don't have free will. Like, you've never had free will. Like, you didn't, this isn't something that you consented to. You literally were
yeah.
born into it, and like, this was your whole thing.
Yeah. So we learn
Um,
why he denied her. And she's still confused because at this point, she doesn't know that he's not the one who made the deal. So she's
correct.
still like, even though he's like, oh, you didn't consent into it. And she's like, he's right. I knew that. But in her mind, it still doesn't make sense because it's like, if that's the case, then why did he make this deal in the first place? But
Exactly.
I love it. I love that he
Um,
did that.
Anyway, then we go into a whole seduction situation, and she fails to seduce him, but he does not fail to seduce her.
Mm-mm.
And then we go into where I said earlier about how he never spoke about the first person he killed. It's kind of what is real, what did he share, what didn't he share kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he gives background on that, and he says nothing I told you at the lake was a lie. And it's very much an omission of truth, which is still, teetering on the mm,
Yeah.
anyway, so she was like, "If everything you said was true, then why do you have gods impaled on your wall? How can killing leave a mark when you do things like that?" And he's like, "You think I did that to them?" And he goes, "I am not the only primal god, Lisa. Who did that then? Who would be willing to anger the primal of death?" And she's like he's like, "You have no problem attempting to anger or argue with me." And then they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And he says that each court is a territory within Elysium with more than enough land for each primal and their gods to carry out their time as they see fit. And each primal has more than enough power to do whatever they would like. But no matter how powerful any one being is, there are always some who want more power, where what they have is not enough. Um,
Yeah, and we learned that a lot of the primals like to push him, like
correct.
so I wonder if she had it in her mind that, oh, they all live in peace kind of thing, where it's like, no, we all have this power. We're all gonna push each other. And then we learned that the reason why they like to push him is because he's younger, because he wasn't the first primal of death.
Correct. And she's like, "Well, why didn't you fulfill the deal?" And he was like, "It's because I did not make the deal." And she's like, "What?" And he said, "It wasn't me. I was not the primal of death then. My father was. He made the deal with Roderick Muriel. It was he who demanded the first female of the bloodline as a consort." And that's where we're
That
gonna
would
leave part
be,
one.
oh, okay.
Cliffhanger.
Ah,
I
okay,
figured this
no,
was a
that's fair.
perfect cliffhanger.
It's good.
Um, but part two will be out next day if you're listening to this, or same day if you're in our Patreon. Sippin' and bitchin' on all the things.
You're
Wild.
gonna
This
want to
book
listen to
is
part
wild.
two. This is where things are starting to get good, guys.
Nah, I
I'm
know. I mean, the whole
dying.
book is good, but it's okay. Um, yeah. Sippin' and Bitchin' Patreon. Check us out. Do all the things. Share, like, comment, subscribe. All the things.
You know where to find us.
Exactly. But we'll catch you later. Probably in like a second, because you're gonna listen to both episodes back to back, right?
I mean, we read the books back to back, we listen back to back, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But we'll catch you later,
Bye.
bitches.